just this Wednesday, on a Wednesday plenary at the Senate, there was a little bit of a commotion arising from the controversy from the federal government proposed tax reforms. And then we're going to be discussing the nitty-gritty involved within the tax reform proposal. And we have monetary economist in studio is Mr. Ifediora Amobi. He's here to throw more light and give us fresh perspectives to the subject matter. Good morning, Mr. Ifediora Amobi.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you.
And yes, it was intentional when I introduced you as a monetary economist. We're taught that economics is the social science, that deals on money. So when I saw monetary economist, I was like, wow, there must be an explanation for this. So please, very quickly, before we get into the meat of the matter, who is a monetary economist?
Well, the monetary economist is actually somebody who specializes in monetary policy, basically, as opposed to other areas of economics like international development, micro, macro, urban, health economic. I mean, economics is so wide that monetary economics is just one aspect of the disciplines that you can specialize in.
So let's dive right into today's business. We are talking about tax reforms. So tell us what a tax reform bill and what does it entail really?
Okay, well, basically, I mean, the tax reforms is, well, a reform generally is just a way of changing what used to exist into something better. So you're reforming either a program, a bill, a situation in an economy that wasn't necessarily not working, but wasn't working the way it was intended to, So you introduce certain interventions that enable that change from what exists now to what you want it to be in the future, and that's a reform.
Absolutely. Just before this interview commenced, we had a discussion where we were talking about the tax reforms, and where many people don't even understand what the current proposal on tax reforms, what it entails, what are the consequences. They are not aware, which is why we feel some people are actually pushing against it. The ordinary man hears tax and they're like, yes, they are at it again. They want to bill us. They want to collect from us. So based on this current proposal, presidential tax reform proposal, I want you to explain to a layman, the for lack of a better word, the tenets. I hear there are 4 cardinal, proposals under the tax. So just walk us straight. Let us just have a basic understanding of the content of that tax reform proposal.
Okay. Well, this new tax reform, or the tax reform proposal, 4 bills were submitted to the National Assembly. One is what was called the Nigeria Revenue, to establish the Nigeria Revenue Service, which is a way of taking the FIRS, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, and rejigging it or re-engineering it into a more efficient or better revenue collection agency.
A more transparent,
more accountable, more open, agency that will be more revenue driven and consolidated into a centralized system. What we have currently is we have FIRS, which is supposed to be a centralized revenue service agency. However, we have local governments and we have states that collect their own taxes. So you can be driving from here to Nsukka and you can be stopped, 1,001 times on the road with different tax forces of collecting. And so it's not centralized and you can't account for what they are collecting. So what this new bill is trying to do is to bring everything together under one roof. All taxes now come to a central agency and is now distributed to the states, local governments, and other actors that will now use those funds for development. So that's one aspect. The other bills, and that is actually the major reform bill. The other ones are just establishing, just establishing administrative office agencies that will now support this. So you have 4, 2 of them. One, like I said, will now be to establish this new agency. The other one will be to, I think, also establish, or rather, change what was known as the Joint Tax Board.
Joint Tax Board.
Yeah, the Joint Tax Board, which has existed for about 30 years.
Okay.
Which is more of an advisory body.
Okay.
Yeah, that advises government on taxes, and then just re-engineer that one.
Okay.
But it is this new tax bill, the tax reform itself proper, that is what I would call the bone of contention at the moment. And it's not every aspect of it. There are just, one or two key aspects, most especially the VAT, the area that
I was going to get to the VAT.
Yes.
Because from the little we're able to gather this morning, it's as though the state actors, the governors, are kicking against the bill, especially the one that has to do with VAT, because they are trying to revisit the percentages per se.
Right.
Walk us through it. What does that entail? And one of our headlines today mentioned some 55%, the numbers, the sharing ratio.
Right.
There's so many people look at the numbers and they are just confused. So tell us about that, how it affects the state actors, and then the percentage distribution.
Okay, prior to this this tax reform bill, VAT is actually a tax on consumption. So if you purchase an item, you pay VAT on that item. And then VAT is basically a value-added tax.
Hold that thought. Now, when you talk about VAT, we're trying to bring it down so everybody can understand. When you go to convenience stores and retail stores and you make purchases, the value-added tax is that extra amount that is added to your fee when it's printed out. Am I correct?
Well, yes and no, because a tax is actually something that's added to the price.
Okay. Okay, so the extra amount added to your fee is not really value-added tax.
No, it is. Okay, if you take an item, let's say you buy a loaf of bread. If that loaf of bread is 1,600, and you eventually end up paying 1,650, you will see on your receipt VAT 7.5%, 50 naira or thereabout, for example. That's the VAT. That's the tax you're paying on that loaf of bread because you're the final consumer. Now, what that VAT actually is, before that loaf of bread became a loaf of bread, it went from being wheat on the farm to being processed.
Value chain.
There's a long value chain, including transportation and logistics. And at each of these stages, every value that's added to that product to now finally get to the final product, which is a loaf of bread, is supposed to be taxed. So when all that is aggregated, is actually put together, it's that 7.5%. So you are paying that value-added tax that got that product to where it is today. Nobody has a problem with that because that's a universal definition, and that's how it's done everywhere in the world where VAT is implemented. The reason it's actually an issue here in Nigeria now is that is actually the way it is administered. Now, what has happened in the past, or what exists now, because this new bill hasn't, gone into effect, is that the states where the company that produces that item is registered gets the tax.
The entire tax.
The entire tax, yes. So, and because most companies have their head offices or their manufacturing plants in a place like Lagos, Lagos gets a big chunk of VAT. And states that don't have that manufacturing, get less than that. What most of the governors, because you mentioned the governors earlier, what most of the governors are kicking against and want the tax board to revisit and redefine is that going forward, since VAT is a tax on consumption, It is where the good is consumed. The state where the good is purchased and
That the
consumed,
taxes
that's
should
where
go
the
to.
taxes should go to. Because which you can't really fault them because it's unfair. If we take, for instance, take a bottle of
But
Coke.
this argument of the governors, where is this premise coming from? Is it constitutional, or do you feel this is just a moral thing to do?
It's more of a moral thing to do, and I actually stand with them.
Okay.
Especially the northern governors, because we have actually looked at this and we've said, okay, fine. Sprite or Coca-Cola is produced at the Nigeria Bottling Company's plant in Igomo, for instance, right? But Coke is consumed across the nation. But all the VAT goes to Lagos. And they're like, hey, okay, if we're going to now reform and change things, we have stomached this all these years, let's now get it right. So let's take this bill. We're not saying throw the bill away. Let's revisit, have more consultations, have more people look at it, and let's find a way of calculating how much of that Coke is consumed in Enugu, in Ogun, in Yobe, in Akwa Ibom, and each state, should get the VAT. So, take for instance now, remember, I think it was a couple of months ago or thereabouts during the protests, the end governance protests. Yeah. Now, there were protests going on across the country, and on social media there was this thing about it not being, not happening in the southeast. Yeah. And most people in the southeast were posting videos of people just enjoying themselves.
Yes.
Okay, so within that period, consumption of, say, beer and alcohol and everything was high in the southeast. So,
theoretically speaking,
exactly, the VAT for that consumption should be coming here, but it's going to the breweries. You see. And another good example is your telephone. Okay, Airtel, MTN, Glo, they have their head offices in Lagos or Abuja. But we all use these services. We make, in some places, they even make more calls than where the head office is. But when you pay and you scratch your card, you're paying VAT to the head office. So the governors are saying, let's find a way of calculating how much of these goods are consumed locally within our states.
Is this what the northern governors are proposing as well?
This is one of the things they're proposing. Another thing they're proposing, which also makes sense, is that they are saying, listen, we are actually disadvantaged in the sense that in the north, we're not more manufacturing inclined. We're more agriculture. So we produce food. However, food is non-vatable. So we spend all our energy on our farms, we produce food, we feed the rest of you guys, and
now
it's tax-free.
We understand that there was a presidential committee that was set up to look into these reforms before presenting submission to recommendation to the president.
Right.
Was due process not, followed through? Weren't there some kind of stakeholder engagement to bring everybody, to the table so that these issues can be thrashed, thoroughly before presenting this proposal? What are your thoughts on that?
It was done. There were consultations. They met with various stakeholder groups across Nigeria. They met with governors. Not all the governors. They had to pick and choose, I think, one or two from each zone, just to have a good sample representation, which they did. They even met with the Governors Forum. They had
a robust
at least
dialogue.
Yes, with them, and that I can actually give them credit for. The only thing is that most times people don't feel compelled to bring up, they're just happy to be invited. You know, they come there, they attend, they have lunch, you know, wear the badge, take their package, and off they go. But the whole idea is to have, you know, a cerebral discussion and a deep dive into these issues, to bring them up, look at them, and then come up with a consensus. The head of the presidential committee on taxation, I think,
Oyedele,
has actually acknowledged some of these things and said, yes, the case that the governors have raised and some of these other issues that have come up are actually valid, and that they will, you know, address them and look into them. But he also wants it presented so that there'll be, you know, an enriched discussion on it. And so I think we're actually in the right direction.
Okay.
For me, particularly as an economist, it's a good bill, good reform, but it has to be done in such a way that it's a win-win across Nigeria.
All right. Okay, let's talk about SMEs. There's, I guess, a clause, because I've not had the opportunity of, you know, going through, yes, and you can understand with me, I'm not an economist, but there's a clause that actually postulates that a certain amount will be reimbursed to small and medium scale businesses based on VAT. You know, the VAT they spend on assets and services will be reimbursed to them by the government. How does that work? Because in my non-economist mind, I'm like, how will that really work? The government is dipping into its purse to give to small and medium scale business. And they're also saying that this can, you know, on a long run, reduce inflation. I don't understand how that works. So just walk us through it.
Okay, yes. That clause actually was there. But one of the things they have done, or they're actually trying to do, is to, and they have actually proposed it, is just like you said, trying to implement that and enforce it, because in Nigeria, about 60+% of MSMEs and micro, small and medium enterprises are not documented. They are not registered.
With corporate affairs?
With corporate affairs, yeah, you know, with the government. And so you have a lot of small shops. I mean,
mom and pop shops.
Mom and pop shops. If you go outside, the average house, even the gate man has his own small kiosk there. You know, these are micro enterprises. So how do you now reimburse all of those ones? And those ones come in the millions across Nigeria. So what they have now proposed is this. We're going to now do a tax exempt for small businesses. I think they said 50 million naira and below.
Is a small business.
Is a small or medium enterprise, yeah. So those ones will now be exempted from all this. What it now does is that it takes away all the administrative and logistics enforcement burdens that government would have used to go after each one of them, and then focus on the big companies, at least as a start for now. As the system improves, then we can now bring it down, you know, to the smaller ones, until we have everybody documented and everybody has a tax ID number, you know, as well.
So tax exemption for those who earn below 1 million naira. What's your take on that?
Yeah, for those who earn below $1 million, that's $1 million naira a year, $1 million naira.
Yes, a year.
Businesses.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the micro, you know, micro enterprises.
Businesses, I think individuals who earn below 1 million naira a year.
No, for me personally, I think everybody who works should be taxed. Whether you earn 10 naira, whether you earn, because the tax, you see, it's not just a percentage thing. The percent also has to vary based on the income bracket. So certain income brackets have to be defined. If you're earning from 1 naira to 999,000 naira, this is what your tax would be. If you're earning between this and that, there's a slightly higher, as you go up. So I am a believer in a graduated tax, tax administrative, system. What it does basically is that it gives you as a taxpayer a sense of responsibility. If I don't pay tax, I can see this item that belongs to the government and I can destroy it or vandalize it. It doesn't matter. But if 1 kobo of my 100 naira is going here, there's a sense of responsibility, a sense of ownership, a sense of protection.
Collective ownership.
Yes, that we all have. So, and a tax is, government is not a business. Government doesn't sell, government doesn't produce, government provides a service. And the only way government makes money is through taxes. Now, for certain governments like Nigeria, where we have a major product like oil, the government will now say, well, I will also take a percentage of this. That's why we have the NNPCs and all, etc. And so revenue from oil, a certain chunk of it goes to government. Otherwise, not every country has oil or gold or diamonds or something like that. Most countries just depend on taxation.
All right. Let me get back to our discussion prior to this question, where you said that many micro businesses, nano businesses are beyond the grid. They are not under the grid. They are not captured. And you also alluded to the fact that there's a necessity for gradual inculcation, for lack of a better word, as time goes on. But there's this thought that came into my head, and I'm like, why not? Or is there a proposal within the proposal that gives off incentives to these nano businesses that will actually make them come and want to register? For example, making CAT registration free. Are there incentives within the proposal that will actually be strategic in getting these businesses into the national grid?
Yes, it does exist. And the central bank has had this big financial inclusion program over the years to bring in as many people into the banking system, first and foremost, and then to also have them, above the radar. For a lot of businesses, and it's just typical, it's not even a Nigerian thing, it's just human thing. Like you said, the first thing you said this morning was when you hear the word tax, you flinch, right? So for a lot of people doing business, if you can avoid paying taxes, you will not pay taxes. But you will be the loudest criticizing government for not delivering on services that you didn't pay for. So, and that's why in so many countries, especially the Western countries, tax evasion
is a serious issue.
Exactly. You can spend years in jail for not just paying taxes. Because there are two things that are your civic responsibility as a citizen of a country: paying taxes and voting. These are the only two things that give you a voice. If you don't vote, you can't criticize government for making the wrong decisions. If you don't pay taxes, you can't criticize government for making the wrong expenditure because it wasn't your money. Now,
there's this school of thought that says the reason why the proposal is getting so much criticisms and pushback is because of this particular issue, where they say that there's a tax rate of about 25% for individuals earning over 100 million naira monthly. Now, I don't know if the numbers are correct, but is there a clause that says individuals that earn a certain amount? And we're talking about the uber rich and probably the politicians. Would you say that the reason why they are kicking against it is because of that 25% tax rate that has been attached to that earning?
I don't recall seeing something like that. What I recall on the 25% tax is that this new tax bill will, over the next 24 months or thereabout.
2 years.
Yeah. Decrease corporate tax.
What
Corporate
does that
income
mean?
tax. Company tax.
Okay.
Yeah, the taxes companies pay
Okay.
to government from 30% currently down to 25%.
Okay. Okay.
And the whole idea is to actually encourage them to save and produce more and employ more. So it has, the reform bill has various aspects of
Yeah.
what government wants to do.
Mm.
So they also want to use taxes as a development tool. They also want to use taxes as an investment tool, right? So incentives will be provided to companies that employ over a certain number of people, that companies that do some type of corporate social responsibility, or donations, something like that. So with those incentives, they can bring in more people, which can now increase, because what they got. Remember what President Tinubu said during the campaign, one of his few outings, was that he wants to widen the tax base, get more people to pay taxes. And as more people pay taxes, and this is now economic theory, the tax rate drops, because now you're getting more money.
More money.
Yes, it's a scale thing. If only 3 of us are paying taxes,
To pay more.
we'll pay more because government needs the money.
But then there's another school of thought that says that these revenues that are being garnered, if I'm not wrong, 65% of government revenue comes from taxation. Now, these revenues that are garnered are actually used in servicing debts. Now, if that is the case, is this not a vicious circle? Are we really improving?
Well, those are some of the key criticisms, and I actually agree with you. Currently, we have a very, very, I'd say a bad, track record of borrowing. And as we speak here, we're still borrowing. The domestic debt has gone from 50 trillion to 70 trillion today. And if we continue the way we are going, by the end of March next year, we might hit 100 trillion in domestic debt, not foreign debt. Foreign debt is about $45 billion. $45 billion. Domestic debt is in Naira. And we're still borrowing. Now, we have just presented a 2025 budget that also has a big chunk of its financing coming from external borrowing. So we don't necessarily see the borrowing even slowing down anytime soon. And yes, it is. It should be a nightmare for the debt managers, and most especially the debt management office, on how to manage this debt. And also a big nightmare for Nigerians, because who's going to pay for all this is going to be our children. And
our children's children.
Yes.
So before we round off, we've been talking about tax reform bills and the rest of it. I want to know, in a nutshell, how will this affect the country's economic sector?
In a nutshell, it's supposed to improve the economy, because when you reform and government makes more money, they can use that money to now do more things. Now, and there's always a flip side for everything.
Sure.
On the flip side, government will make more money. Yes, yay, everybody's happy. But we also operate in an economy that we have forces that we have no control over.
Market forces, you mean?
That drives the economy, yes. We have exchange rates. We have interest rates. So, foreign exchange, if the Naira to the dollar goes from 1,700 today to 2,001 next year, and we make more Naira from taxes, the exchange rate wipes out that, because what we're going to import, if it's machinery, is priced in dollars. So we still don't need more Naira, and we still don't tax more people. So, because we're actually an economy that depends on what happens outside, it's still, we're still dependent. We're still third world. We're still not determining our own fate 100%.
Yeah.
So it's
all right. So we have gradually run out of time, but in just 1 minute, you're an economist, and a very cerebral one at that. I must give it to you. What would be your advice if Nigeria was a 65-year-old man, so much neck deep in debt? What would be your advice? What's the way forward? What can we do just in a minute before we round off this session?
Well, first and foremost, debt is not bad.
Okay.
The figure itself is not bad in absolute terms. It's what the money is being used for, one, and two, what kind of return on that investment have we
has accrued
put
to
in exactly to pay off the debt. Because if we're just borrowing for one day and consumption, then we're going to be in serious trouble. If we're borrowing, and people just say, yeah, borrow for infrastructure. It's not just for infrastructure. It's infrastructure that gives you a rate of return.
Yes.
You can use the money to build roads. You can toll the roads and use the toll to pay off the debt. You can use the money to build a road, not toll the road, but let the road lead to a market that will generate revenue to pay off the debt. So those are, things you have to think of, the interlinkages of, the money that you have. So even a country at 65 can still manage its debt properly and pay it off and say, okay, yeah. And then go for, borrow money with less conditions, lower interest, etc. That way you're not burdened by the interest rates.
Actually, that would be a discussion for another day, because I know it's a whole new conversation. Thank you so much, Mr. Ifediora Amobi. It was a great session with you. I hope to continue, but of course, time has gradually run out on us. Thank you so much for still staying with us. Still Signature Morning. Don't go anywhere as entertainment news comes up right after this timeout.